The silent signal. The vastness of space was silent, endless, and cold. Stars burned in the distance like ancient sentinels, watching over the void. In this emptiness, a lone salvage ship, the Wayfarer, drifted through the darkness, its engines humming softly. Captain Ryland Cross leaned over the console, watching the scanners with a bored expression. It had been weeks since they found anything valuable. The galaxy was full of wreckage, but most of it had been stripped clean by other salvagers. Beside him, Mira Holt, the ship's engineer, tapped at the controls. "Still nothing," she muttered, her voice laced with frustration. Ryland sighed. "Keep looking. We need something big, something worth the fuel we're burning." Then the ship's computer beeped. A signal. Not just any signal. It was old. Decades old. A distress beacon, weak but still pulsing through the void. Mira frowned. "That can't be right. This frequency hasn't been used in at least 40 years. Ryland straightened. "Put it on speakers." A low, distorted message crackled through the comms. A voice, barely understandable, whispered through static. "This is Captain Elias Drake, UNS Excalibur. We are not alone. The war is not over." Then silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The UNS Excalibur. Everyone in the galaxy knew the name. The Excalibur had been one of the most advanced warships ever built by humanity. A battleship designed to fight against the alien warlords of the Kryn Dominion. But it had vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. No wreckage had ever been found. No survivors. Just another ghost lost in space. Mira's voice was tight. "That ship, it's supposed to be gone." Ryland's mind raced. If the Excalibur was still out there, fully intact, it could be worth a fortune. The technology alone would make them rich. "Can you trace the signal?" he asked. Mira's fingers danced over the controls. "It's coming from the Nebulon Rift, about 2 hours away." The Rift. Their pilot, Darren Voss, turned in his seat. "That place is a graveyard. Ships go in, but they don't come out." Ryland narrowed his eyes at the screen. The Nebulon Rift was a dangerous region of space, filled with debris, strange anomalies, and rumors of ships disappearing without explanation. But the Excalibur was there, and it was still active. "We're going," Ryland said. Darren hesitated. "You sure? We don't know what's out there." Ryland's jaw tightened. "We're salvagers. This could be the biggest find of our lives." Mira took a deep breath. "Then we better be ready for anything." The Wayfarer's engines roared to life, and the ship turned toward the rift. As they moved closer, the darkness around them seemed to deepen. The stars became dim, almost like they were fading from existence. The air on the ship felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing against them. Then they saw it. The UNS Excalibur emerged from the shadows like a ghost from another time. A massive warship, its hull blackened but intact. No drifting. No damage. It looked as if it had just left the shipyards yesterday. Mira's breath hitched. "That's impossible." Ryland stared in disbelief. "She's still here, after all these years." But something was wrong. The ship's lights were on. The reactor was active. And then, their scanners detected movement inside. Someone, or something, was still on board. Before they could react, the Excalibur's main engines suddenly ignited. The massive warship wasn't just floating in space. It was waking up. Boarding the ghost ship, the UNS Excalibur loomed ahead, a massive shadow against the endless void. Its dark hull, worn by time but strangely intact, reflected the dim light of distant stars. The warship wasn't dead. It was awake. Inside the Wayfarer, Captain Ryland Cross felt a chill creep up his spine. Their scanners had confirmed it. Something was moving inside. But how? The ship had been lost for 50 years. Mira Holt, the ship's engineer, was glued to the console. "This doesn't make sense. The Excalibur's power core is still running. Shields are weak but active. But she hesitated, her face pale. There are no life signs. Ryland clenched his jaw. No life signs, but movement. Darren Voss, their pilot, shifted nervously. So what's the plan, Cap? We dock and hope we don't get shot. Ryland exhaled. We're salvagers. That ship is worth more than anything we've ever seen. We board it, check for threats, and see if we can take control. Mira's fingers tightened around the console. And if someone, or something, is waiting for us. Ryland met her gaze. Then we make sure we don't end up like the last crew. Docking with the unknown. The Wayfarer slowly approached the Excalibur's docking bay. The warship's exterior showed no visible damage, no battle scars from its last fight. It was as if time had simply forgotten it. As they neared, a deep rumbling echoed through space. The hangar bay doors, Mira whispered. They're opening. The crew went silent as the ancient warship seemed to welcome them inside. This is bad, Darren muttered. Really, really bad. We're already here, Ryland said, gripping the ship's rail. Take us in. Darren guided the Wayfarer through the yawning hangar doors, its landing gear clanking onto the cold steel floor. As the engines powered down, the silence pressed in around them. They were inside the Excalibur, and it felt wrong. Footsteps in the dark. The crew suited up and stepped into the hangar. The air inside was stale but breathable. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Weapons drawn, they moved cautiously. The massive hangar stretched out before them, filled with old human starfighters, their sleek forms coated in dust. This place should be falling apart, Mira said, running a hand along a fighter's hull. But everything looks preserved. Darren scanned the area with his flashlight. Yeah, well, I don't see any bodies. Where's the crew? No one answered. Ryland motioned toward the control panels near the far wall. Mira, see if you can access the ship's logs. We need to know what happened here. Mira nodded and got to work. As she connected her datapad to the Excalibur systems, Darren paced nearby, muttering to himself. Then, a noise. A faint, metallic clang echoed through the hangar. The crew froze. Another clang. Closer this time. Ryland raised his weapon, scanning the shadows. Mira. Almost there, she whispered. The sound came again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Coming from deeper inside the ship. Mira's datapad beeped. I got something. Captain Drake's final log entry. Play it, Ryland said, his voice tight. Mira pressed a button, and the Excalibur's old speakers crackled to life. This is Captain Elias Drake. To any survivors or rescuers, we are not alone. The war is not over. They won't let us leave. They won't let us die. Static. Then, the power flickered. The emergency lights dimmed, and a cold whisper drifted through the air. Ryland turned sharply. We're leaving. Now. A figure appeared at the far end of the hangar. Humanoid. Tall. Wearing a tattered human uniform. Its eyes glowed. Then it spoke. You shouldn't have come here. The Excalibur was not abandoned. Something was still here. The captain's log. The cold silence of the UNS Excalibur pressed down on them like a heavy weight. The humanoid figure at the far end of the hangar did not move. Its glowing eyes were locked onto them, unblinking. Captain Ryland Cross felt his pulse quicken. Every instinct told him to run, to get his crew off this ship, but his feet stayed planted. Mira Holt's voice was barely above a whisper. Ryland, what do we do? The figure took one step forward. The sound of its boot hitting the metal floor echoed unnaturally. Then, without warning, the Excalibur's lights flickered again, and the figure vanished. Darren Voss swore under his breath. Nope. Nope, I'm done. That's a ghost. A real, actual ghost. Ryland swallowed hard and forced his voice to stay steady. No such thing. He turned to Mira. Get the logs. Now. Mira's fingers flew across her datapad. The ship's old systems groaned, resisting her attempt to access the data. But then, with a sudden click, the main log files opened. The speakers crackled. A voice. **** gold, tired, and filled with something Rylan couldn't quite place. **** echoed through the ship. This is Captain Elias Drake. If anyone is hearing this, then we have failed. The war is not over. The enemy is relentless. And the Excalibur, we are its last defenders. Mira scrolled down, her eyes scanning the words. There are more entries. A lot more. She clicked on the most recent one. The voice returned, weaker this time. They never stopped coming. The Kryn, they were just the beginning. We fought something else. Something worse. It learned from us. It turned our own ship against us. I don't know how much longer we can hold. But we won't stop. We won't surrender. Not while the Excalibur still stands. A sudden bang made everyone jump. The door leading deeper into the ship slammed shut on its own. Darren spun around. Okay, that's it. We're done here. We are done. Rylan's jaw tightened. Not yet. We need to know what happened to the crew. Mira's face had gone pale. She pointed at the screen. I think I found the answer. She tapped the final log entry. We are not alone. We are not dead. The ship won't let us die. Silence. Darren backed toward the Wayfarer's ramp. I don't like the way that's phrased. Mira shook her head. It gets worse. The last log wasn't recorded by Drake. She scrolled down, her voice unsteady. It was recorded. Yesterday. A shiver ran down Ryland's spine. Yesterday. But the Excalibur had been lost for 50 years. Mira whispered, How is that possible? Then the Excalibur answered. The ship's speakers groaned to life again. But this time, it wasn't a recording. It was a voice. A deep, distorted voice that seemed to come from the ship itself. You want to know what happened? The floor beneath them rumbled. The Excalibur's engines roared back to life, and the entire ship began to move. Then stay. And fight. The hangar doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The Wayfarer was not leaving this ship. Not unless they fought their way out. The Phantom crew. The UNS Excalibur trembled beneath their feet as its engines roared to life. The ship was moving, but no one was piloting it. Captain Ryland Cross spun toward the Wayfarer, his heart pounding. Mira, can you override the hangar controls? We need to get out of here. Mira was already working on her datapad, fingers flying across the interface, trotting. But something's fighting back. It's like the ship doesn't want to let us leave. Darren Voss cursed. That's because the ship is cursed. I told you. Ghosts. We need to get out of here before we end up just like them. But then, footsteps. Not distant ones, not echoes from the halls of an abandoned warship. These were close. Right behind them. Ryland turned, his hand instinctively gripping his sidearm. Mira and Darren followed his gaze, their breath hitching. Across the hangar, figures emerged from the shadows. Men and women in old, tattered uniforms. Their faces were pale, their bodies almost translucent under the flickering emergency lights. Their eyes glowed faintly, like dying embers in the dark. They looked human, but they weren't alive. One of them stepped forward. An older man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a captain's insignia on his torn uniform. His voice was deep, rough, too real to be a recording. You shouldn't have come here. Mira took a sharp breath. Who are you? The man's eyes locked onto hers. Captain Elias Drake. Silence. Ryland's throat went dry. You're supposed to be dead. Drake gave a slow, grim nod. We are. Mira's hand tightened around her datapad. But you're standing right in front of us. Drake's gaze flickered to the glowing interface in her hands. Because the Excalibur won't let us die. Ryland's pulse hammered in his ears. What do you mean? Drake took a step forward. The rest of his crew stood still, watching, their expressions unreadable. When we fought the Kryn, we thought we were facing just another enemy. Drake's voice was hollow, haunted, but they weren't alone. Something else was out there. Something worse. Mira swallowed. Worse than the Kryn. Drake's jaw clenched. They were hunters. They didn't want to destroy us. They wanted to learn from us. They studied our tactics, our technology. Every battle, they adapted. Darren muttered, like an evolving predator. Drake nodded. And they didn't just want our weapons. They wanted us. A chill ran through Ryland's spine. What do you mean? Drake exhaled slowly. We fought them for days, weeks, maybe years. I don't even know anymore. Time. It stopped meaning anything. We should have died, but we didn't. Mira's voice trembled. The logs said you weren't alone, that you weren't dead. Drake's eyes darkened, because the Excalibur wouldn't let us go. The ship trembled again, as if it was listening. Drake continued. The enemy did something to the ship. It fused us with it. The Excalibur became more than just steel and circuits. It became something alive. It wouldn't let us abandon the fight. Darren's face paled. You're saying the ship trapped you? Drake gave a slow, bitter smile. Not just us. You too. The realization hit like a hammer. The moment they stepped on board, the Excalibur had closed its grip around them. Mira backed away, shaking her head. No, we're not part of this. Drake's expression didn't change. You are now. Ryland clenched his fists. Then how do we break free? Drake's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Hope. Sorrow. That's the only question that. Another deep rumble shook the Excalibur, and warning lights blared across the hangar. Mira looked at the control panel. We just jumped to hyperspace. Darren's voice rose in panic. Where the hell are we going? Drake's expression darkened. Back to war. Ryland's breath caught. Against who? Drake turned toward the hangar doors, where a massive holographic display flickered to life. A fleet of unidentified warships appeared on the screen. Fast, predatory, and unlike anything in known space. Drake's voice was grim. The enemy we were never meant to survive. The Excalibur wasn't done fighting. And now, neither were they. The unfinished war. The UNS Excalibur surged through hyperspace, locked onto an unknown destination. The hum of its engines filled the air, a deep and ominous sound that pulsed like a heartbeat. Captain Ryland Cross gripped the nearest railing, his mind racing. They were trapped on a warship that had been lost for 50 years, piloted by phantoms who still believed they had a war to fight. And now, they were heading straight into battle. Mira Holt frantically worked her datapad, her fingers flying across the interface. I can't override it. The ship's navigation is completely locked. Darren Voss let out a nervous laugh, one that lacked any humor. Of course it is, because we're not in control here. He turned to Captain Elias Drake, who stood watching them with his eerie, glowing eyes. Where are you taking us? Drake didn't answer right away. Instead, he gazed at the holographic display, showing the enemy fleet ahead. A formation of warships, sleek and alien, like hunting beasts waiting for prey. Back to the battle, he said finally. Back to finish what we started. Ryland clenched his jaw. That's not our fight. Drake turned to face him, his expression unreadable. It is now. The ship shuddered, alarms blaring through the halls. The Excalibur was dropping out of hyperspace. A deep, inhuman voice crackled through the ship's speakers. The language was unknown, guttural, almost like a growl. But the meaning was clear. Excalibur, you still exist. Mira's blood ran cold. They recognized the ship. Drake's expression was grim. Of course they do. We are the one thing they could never destroy. Outside, the view screen showed the alien fleet repositioning, shifting like a pack of predators sensing fresh prey. The warships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. Living metal, their hulls shifting and rippling like organic tissue. They weren't just ships. They were alive. Darren cursed under his breath. We can't fight that. Drake stepped forward. We already have. He turned to Rylan. And we survived. So will you. Rylan narrowed his eyes. That's what you don't get. We don't want to fight. Drake's voice was low, filled with something ancient and unbreakable. Then you die. A warning siren blared. The enemy ships were locking onto them. The Excalibur answered the challenge. Weapon systems came online. Shields activated. The warship came alive, its old systems pulsing with renewed energy. Mira's eyes widened. The ship's doing it on its own. Drake nodded. It remembers. Ryland's stomach twisted. The Excalibur wasn't just a ship anymore. It was something more, something that refused to be forgotten. And it was preparing for war. Darren's voice was sharp. They're firing. A blast of pure energy ripped through space, heading straight for them. Ryland made a choice, the only choice left. Brace for impact. The battle for the Excalibur had begun. The last battle begins. The UNS Excalibur roared to life, its ancient systems surging with renewed power. The warship hadn't forgotten how to fight. It had been waiting. Outside, the alien fleet moved like a pack of predators, silent, calculated, and merciless. Their ships shifted and pulsed, their surfaces rippling like living things. And then, they attacked. A massive energy blast tore through the void, streaking straight toward them. Mira Holt's breath caught in her throat. Incoming. The Excalibur's shields flared to life, absorbing the impact with a thunderous crackle of energy. The ship shuddered, but it held. On the command deck, Captain Elias Drake stood tall, watching the enemy with a hardened gaze. We've been fighting them for 50 years. His eyes flicked to Rylan. Are you ready to join the war? Rylan Cross was not. But the choice was gone. The ship had already decided. The Excalibur's weapons powered up, targeting the enemy fleet without their command. Heavy cannons turned, tracking the alien ships with a calm, inhuman precision. Then, the Excalibur fired. Massive energy beams lashed out, slicing through the darkness. One enemy warship exploded instantly, its living hull splitting apart in a burst of blue fire. Darren Voss gripped his seat. Holy hell, we just took one down in a single shot. Mira shook her head, her face pale. No, the ship did. Ryland barely had time to process that when the enemy returned fire. Torrents of energy slammed into their shields, sending tremors through the ship. Sparks burst from the control panels, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning circuits. Drake didn't flinch. Hold the line. Mira turned to Rylan. We can't keep this up. The ship is fighting on its own, but it's not indestructible. Darren's voice was panicked. We need to get out of here before this turns into our funeral. But the Excalibur didn't want to leave. Ryland's heart pounded. He wasn't a soldier. He was a salvager, but this ship had made him one. He looked at Drake, his jaw clenched. You've been fighting this war for 50 years. Did you ever stop to think that maybe it's time to end it? Drake's expression darkened. There is no end. Rylan refused to believe that. Mira suddenly gasped. Wait. I found something. The ship's core. Rylan turned to her. What about it? She was typing furiously on her datapad. It's alive. Or something close to it. The Excalibur isn't just running automated defenses. It's thinking. Darren's eyes widened. You're saying the ship's an eye. Mira shook her head. No, it's worse. The Excalibur isn't just controlled by a program. It's controlled by the crew. Ryland's breath caught. Drake. The others. They weren't just ghosts. They were part of the ship. Mira looked up at him. If we want to escape, we have to cut them off. We have to shut down the core. Drake's gaze turned cold. You do that, and the Excalibur dies. Rylan met his stare. Then it's time to let go. Drake didn't move. Another impact rocked the ship. They were running out of time. Mira shouted, "We have to decide now." The Excalibur's final battle had begun. Victory or curse. The UNS Excalibur shook violently as another enemy blast struck its shields. Warning alarms howled through the ship, drowning out the voices of the living and the dead. Rylan Cross's pulse pounded in his ears. His crew was trapped. The ship was fighting on its own. And if they didn't act fast, they'd all be dragged into an endless war, just like Drake's crew. Mira Holt's voice snapped him back to reality. "Rylan, I've found the core access point. We can shut it down, but we have to do it now." Drake's ghostly form stepped forward. "You shut down the core, and this ship dies." His glowing eyes narrowed. "You'll be killing us." Rylan's jaw tightened. "You've already been dead for 50 years. Drake's expression darkened, but he didn't deny it. Darren Voss was already moving. "We don't have time for this. We either break free, or we stay here forever." Rylan turned to Mira. "Can you do it?" She nodded, sweat dripping down her brow. "The Excalibur's core is linked to Drake and his crew. If I overload the system, the ship will go dark." Drake clenched his fists. "And without us, the ship won't survive the battle." Rylan hesitated for only a second. "Do it." Mira's fingers slammed onto the console, bypassing security codes with lightning speed. The Excalibur fought back, its ancient systems resisting, but Mira was faster. The ship groaned, a deep, sorrowful sound that felt alive. Drake's face flickered. "Don't do this." Rylan's eyes locked onto his. "You already gave everything. It's time to rest." With a final keystroke, Mira shut down the core. The effect was instantaneous. The Excalibur lurched, its engine sputtering. The once glowing control panels faded to black, and the ship's mighty weapons fell silent. Drake and his crew began to dissolve, their forms flickering like dying embers. Drake's voice was barely a whisper. "We were never meant to leave." Then, they were gone. For the first time in 50 years, the Excalibur was truly empty. Mira gasped. "The ship's falling apart. We have to get out of here." Darren was already sprinting toward the Wayfarer. "Then move. We don't have long before the enemy finishes us off." The crew raced back to their ship as the Excalibur drifted, its mighty form breaking apart. Outside, the enemy ships halted, their weapons lowering. Then, without a sound, they turned and vanished into the void. Rylan watched, breathless. "They're leaving." Mira exhaled. Maybe they only wanted the Excalibur. Maybe, without Drake and his crew, it's no longer a threat. Darren shook his head. Or maybe they know we barely made it out alive. The Wayfarer disengaged from the dying warship and sped away. Behind them, the UNS Excalibur, once feared, once invincible, finally crumbled into the abyss, its long war over at last. Rylan sat back in his seat, exhaustion washing over him. "Let's never do that again." Mira gave a weak laugh. "Agreed." Darren punched in the coordinates for home. "So, what do we tell the rest of the galaxy?" Rylan stared out the viewport at the wreckage, his voice quiet. "That some wars never end, and some ghosts just need to be let go." The Wayfarer disappeared into hyperspace, leaving the Excalibur's legend behind. But deep in the void, where no one was watching, a faint signal pulsed in the dark. The Excalibur was not done yet.